The first time I walked into that courtroom, I already knew how the story was supposed to end. You could feel it in the air, thick and heavy like a storm that had already decided where it was going to hit. The judge hadn't even spoken yet, but his reputation walked in before him. People whispered his name the way you whisper about bad weather or a sickness in the family. Judge Malcolm Harlan. In Brookstone County, folks said if you stood in front of his bench and you weren't rich, white, or connected, you might as well start memorizing your inmate number. I remember sitting there in that stiff wooden chair, hands folded, trying to look calm, thinking, all right, here we go again. I wasn't supposed to be calm, though. I was supposed to be nervous, sloppy, defensive. That's what people like him expected from people like me. A black guy in a borrowed suit, shoes a half-size too tight, standing alone at the defense table. I could feel his eyes on me before I ever looked up, that slow, measuring stare like he'd already sorted me into a category. You know the look, the one that says I've seen your type 1,000 times, the one that says you're not worth much effort. And yeah, part of me was angry. Another part was tired. Tired of being underestimated, tired of being talked down to, tired of walking into rooms where the outcome felt pre-written. But underneath all that, there was something else, something steady. Because Judge Harlan didn't know who I really was, and he definitely didn't know why I was there. My name that day was Marcus Reed. On paper, I was a freelance delivery driver with a prior misdemeanor and bad luck. In reality, I was Special Agent Marcus Reed, assigned to an internal corruption task force that had been quietly circling Brookstone County for over a year. Complaints, patterns, sentencing data that made no sense unless you looked at it through one ugly lens. Harlan was the centerpiece, the kind of man who hid behind procedure and tradition while wrecking lives with a clean smile. We needed him on the record. Not rumors, not vibes, proof. The case before mine was a young woman named Elena Torres. Shoplifting. $40 worth of baby supplies. Her public defender barely had time to open his mouth before Harlan shut him down. He lectured her about responsibility, about morals, about how people like her were draining the system. Then he sentenced her to 6 months. The sound her mother made from the gallery wasn't even a scream. It was worse, this broken little gasp like the air had been punched out of her chest. Harlan didn't react. He never did. He just adjusted his robe and called the next case. Mine. I stepped forward, heart steady, face neutral. My attorney, a nervous guy named Phil who smelled like cheap cologne and fear, leaned in and whispered, "Take the plea." Trust me. He wouldn't look me in the eye. I shook my head. When Harlan asked how I pled, Phil opened his mouth and I cut him off. Not guilty. You could feel the room shift. Harlan's eyebrow twitched just slightly like a glitch. He leaned forward. "Mr. Reed," he said, his voice smooth but sharp underneath, "do you understand the seriousness of these charges?" I said I did. He smiled, the kind of smile that doesn't reach the eyes. He set my bail at an amount so high Phil actually laughed, thinking it was a joke. It wasn't. Then came the commentary. No roots, no stability. A threat to the community. I asked him what community he meant. He didn't like that. People like you, he said, slipping just enough for everyone to hear it. That was the hook. That was what we needed. Over the next few days, things escalated fast. My request to wear civilian clothes at trial was denied. Motions disappeared. Evidence went missing. Then came the private meeting. A bailiff walked me down a quiet hallway into Harlan's chambers, no lawyers, no record. Illegal as hell. He poured himself a drink and offered me a deal, not legally, but personally. Plead guilty, do a short sentence, disappear quietly. Or fight him and lose everything. When I pushed back, he leaned in close and told me accidents happen. On the courthouse steps, in holding cells, on the road to state prison. I remember thinking, wow, he really believes he's untouchable. Jail wasn't fun, but it was useful. Word travels fast in places like that. A clerk in the law library, a kid barely out of his teens, slipped me a note one night. Names. Numbers. A shell nonprofit tied to court fines. Money flowing out of the county straight into accounts no one was supposed to notice. Greed. Always greed. The racism explained the cruelty, but the money explained the system. Trial day felt like walking into a trap I'd helped build. Harlan controlled the room, the jury the pace. The prosecutor was his golfing buddy. They worked in sync, finishing each other's sentences. When I cross-examined their star witness, a deputy who claimed I'd assaulted him, I took my time. Asked simple questions. Let him talk. Then I introduced a technical detail he couldn't explain, something that proved his story couldn't be true. The jury leaned in. Harlan lost his patience. He dismissed the jury and went off the record. That's when he snapped. He told me he'd instruct them however he wanted, that facts were flexible, that he'd make sure I didn't survive long enough to appeal. He said it all with that same calm confidence, like he was explaining the weather. I straightened up, dropped the act, and told him he'd just threatened a federal agent. His face drained of color right as the doors behind him burst open. FBI jackets, badges, boots on tile. My supervisor stepped in cool and professional and read him his rights. He kept shouting about authority, about respect, about knowing powerful people. No one listened. Watching them cuff him was surreal. The man who'd spent decades looking down on others suddenly couldn't meet anyone's eyes. The courtroom, silent for so long, erupted. Not cheering exactly. Something deeper. Release. The aftermath was messy and public. Charges piled up. Financial crimes, civil rights violations, conspiracy. His former allies flipped fast. The same system he'd abused turned on him with brutal efficiency. He was convicted, sentenced to decades, and stripped of everything he thought made him untouchable. Months later, I drove past that courthouse. Same building, different energy. New judge, new policies. People walking in didn't look so defeated anymore. I thought about Elena, about her mother, about all the names I'd seen on those files. Justice came late for them, but it came. Here's the part I still wrestle with. Was it enough? Harlan will die in prison, probably convinced he was the victim of some grand betrayal. Meanwhile, the damage he did can't be fully undone. So I want to know what you think. Is exposing monsters like him enough, or does real justice require something deeper, something systemic? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Argue with me if you want. Share this story if you've seen power abused up close. And if you believe accountability still matters, stick around. There are more stories like this, and they don't always end the way you expect.